Oregon's been getting these wide receiver commits in the class of 2023. Kyler Casper reclassified to 2022, or else he would have joined Jurrion Dickey and now Ashton Cozart in next year's recruiting class of wideouts so far. But the Ducks have been doing all this without a signal caller in that class, and you just wonder how much it could elevate Dante Dowdell in that class as well as a running back, how much the recruiting could elevate even further for next year's class if they're able to get a big-time signal caller. So let's start with Dante Moore, the five-star quarterback recruit out of the Detroit area. What's the latest on his national recruitment, and where are the Ducks in that mix?
The Ducks are still right in the thick of it for Dante Moore, but a lot of schools feel that way too. And I think that's what makes his recruitment unique as a quarterback, because usually we talk about 2 to 3 schools total with quarterbacks, but with Dante, it's like the list is extending. And now Oregon's had him on campus for an official. LSU the weekend prior. It looks like Texas A&M is going to get the next visit out of him, but he's long been linked to the Midwest. He just visited Michigan this past weekend. He's probably going back to Notre Dame sometime soon, which is probably the favorite, longstanding favorite, if you have to pick one in this recruitment. But I think the combination of continuing to take visits and a truly undefined timeline has started to make a lot of people question where in the world this kid might go for his college football. And it's warranted. He's a 4-year starter at King High School in Detroit. He's won a state championship. He's probably one of the better pocket passers in this class, but does have some mobility and a very strong arm to go on top of that. But Oregon's, casting a wide net beyond Dante as well. But Dante is already taken the official. I think that's unique relative to some of the other quarterback targets. And he's shown the capability of hitting the road again, regardless of taking an official to one school. Like, he's been to LSU multiple times, including that official. Same thing with Eugene. Same thing with some of the other programs that he's visiting multiple times. So I do think that for Oregon, you're keeping an eye on those visits with Dante. And certainly, again, some of the same things we said earlier about the vision of Dan Lanning, the cell of creativity under Kenny Dillingham in terms of expanding the Oregon offense relative to what we saw under Mario Cristobal. All those things resonate with wide receivers and running backs, which we've seen tangibly in terms of who they've added. Of course, it resonates with quarterbacks as well, particularly with Dillingham, who's obviously, personally recruiting Dante and some of these other targets. But I just think because he's been kind of the hardest recruit to peg at the position, I think it's opened the door for not only Dante to continue to take visits to other programs, but for Oregon and others to say, okay, well, we also need to cover our bases and recruit some other quarterbacks. But there's no doubt in my mind that if Oregon could pick one and they would, have to commit to the Ducks, I think Dante would be where that conversation begins.
What about Jayden Rashada and his brother Roman as well, who Oregon is not in on, but we've talked about here before how sometimes brothers want to play together, sometimes they don't. But if Roman were to go to, say, an Ole Miss that's also looking at Jayden Rashada, you'd think that would potentially give him a leg up, like the defensive end we've talked about as well, Mateo Uiagalelei. You're going to talk about Clemson because his brother is already there. So briefly, where is Roman at in his recruitment? And then what about Jayden as well?
Yeah, Roman's got a DM from me in his inbox that I'm hoping he responds to here soon, because he's got his final 3. It's Miami, Virginia Tech, and Ole Miss, as you mentioned. Of the 3, Jayden's only being recruited by 2, Ole Miss and Miami. Miami's still looking for a quarterback. Ole Miss actually got a quarterback commitment last month, so maybe that affects where Jayden Rashada's mind is. So you wonder there. But with Roman, he's going to decide sooner. It's basically any day. He's got his final 3. He's done with visits. So it's really a matter of, do you commit and then take some visits to make sure, or are you done when you make this verbal commitment? And that could be the conundrum internally with the Rashada camp. But we know he's going to come off the board before Jayden. And Jayden is scheduled right now to commit June 18th. So that's, 3-4 weeks from now. But he's going to take visits too. And I think that's what continues to make this interesting. Of course, the most recent trip was out to Eugene, finally, for Duck fans. I know, he had been scheduled to take a visit out there and then went to Ole Miss on that official visit in April. But he finally got back to Eugene. And it was supposed to be a one-day visit. But it ended up being a 2-day visit up there. He actually canceled a camp that he was scheduled to attend in order to stay in Eugene for one more day. That's got to be a positive sign for the Ducks. And as far as I can tell, the visit wasn't an official visit. So in theory, you could get one more visit out of Jayden before he wraps things up on June 18th. But in terms of what we know going forward, Texas A&M will get a visit. Maybe Miami gets another one. LSU is trying. Arkansas is trying. Other schools are trying to get him on campus. But, the only one we know about right now is Texas A&M. So it's kind of simple. Dante Moore and Jayden Rashada, 2 top Duck quarterback targets, are both going to visit Texas A&M here in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye on the Aggies. That could help shape of who ends up at Oregon at the quarterback position, at least between Dante Moore and Jayden Rashada. Moore's the most well-traveled quarterback. Rashada's, coming for that throne, if you will, with the visits he does have coming up. But I do think, even though he's got a top 7 out, I think some of those schools in that mix probably don't feel as good as Oregon does today. Ole Miss, as we said, already has a quarterback committed. Cal is on that list. Don't think they're a major player, although they've been recruiting him as long as any program on his list. I think it's more about the other 5 schools. Certainly, Oregon's going to play in this thing. Miami's still looking for their first quarterback commitment in this class of 2023. We mentioned LSU and A&M as well as major contenders. So I do think Jayden, again, the familiarity, the West Coast, the Pac-12 in general, it is going to help Oregon's chances. He finally got that visit in and probably has one more in the bag if he wants to take an official up to Eugene. And I think those parameters line up very well relative to Dante Moore, who already took that official visit to Eugene. So I think the most likely would be Rashada 1, Moore 2. And then there's Avery Johnson. He's kind of the new name who's scheduled an Oregon official for June 17th. So if you're keeping track here, Dante Moore is going to visit A&M, and he could pop at any time. Jayden Rashada is popping on June 18th, so basically when Avery Johnson's in Eugene. And Avery Johnson wants to commit before he goes to the Elite 11 on June 28th. So we're pretty close to figuring out what this Oregon Duck situation is going to look like at the quarterback position. Again, you're going to have visits from all 3 of those guys before all is said and done, and they all want to commit relatively soon, which I think is good news. So you're going to – that anxiety that's probably building is going to be relieved here in the next month or so. But I couldn't tell you which guy it's going to be. I think Rashada is the most likely, but it's certainly not a home run.
To say that I would be shocked if he chose Cal based on that list of 7 teams would be the understatement of the century. But you never know. I suppose crazier things have happened. One of the top recruits in the country not long ago decided to go to Jackson State when he had offers from big Power 5 programs. So you never know. It's just all about the connections that are formed. It's possible, but I'd be pretty surprised if he went to Cal. Plenty to continue to monitor, which is why John Garcia Jr., the director of recruiting for Sports Illustrated, is a recurring guest here on Locked On Ducks. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Spencer.
Thank you all for making this your first listen review of the day. You can check me out on Locked On Pac-12 covering the Conference of Champions for your second listen. I appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.